So we got some stuff going on. Pretty quick on here probably as well. I probably won't be on it very long. So basically what's going on is I made a Lord. First off, we're buying the collector's edition Warhammer decks for the Necrons and the Tyranids. So I'm gonna get those pretty soon. We got the precon for the Elves for Lord of the Rings that we're gonna get in. And then I'm gonna make a Elf deck with those cards. I don't think we're going to get the Hobbit cards. If I make a Hobbit deck, I think I'm going to do it my own sort of way. Thematically, I was going to turn Gollum or Smeagol Helpful Guide into its own deck, black and green. But it's like I think the way to make the Lord of the Rings deck more flavorful, if you do build them, is whoever your commander is, you try and build the deck around their perspective. So like the Aragorn deck, for instance, he was part of the Fellowship. He met Boromir and Faramir. Um, but if when he met Faramir, it would have been at the end of the movie. Um, or no, he met him during the movie. So he met Faramir during the movie. He would have met Faramir at the end of the movie. He would have met Galadriel and Elrond. He met Gandalf. He met Gandalf the White. He met Frodo and Sam and Merry and Pippin and all of them at the very beginning. He met the innkeeper, so you just kind of do all that. And then all of the things that he did are the spells and stuff you would put in. So the slip on the ring spell that we used, or that was in the precon, we didn't use in the Aragorn deck because one, we didn't really care so much about the flicker ability, but two, it doesn't really matter, I don't think, for him. When you use that ability, that's a Frodo thing. So Aragorn never slipped on the ring in the movies. He never um, saw Frodo slip on the ring, I don't think either. Or maybe he did. Yeah, I think maybe he did once on the mountaintop, but he didn't himself put the ring on. So you could add like um, the chain, the mithril chainmail for Frodo and stuff if you wanted to, but if it comes into play and Aragorn is out, it isn't thematically going to fit in with the movie. So we did everything based around the commanders. And as such, we built a deck that's the Fellowship deck for the most part. Not 100%, but from Aragorn's point of view, because we have Aragorn the Uniter. So we have Gundor in there, we have Rohan in there, we have all the Legolas and Gimli, all of those things that they did are inside of that deck from their point of view, spells that they saw during their journey through the movies and stuff. And as such, that means now, like the Gollum deck, if I build a Gollum deck that's black green, I would build it through Gollum's eyes in the movies, which means you'd have all of the Gollums in there. And then you'd have Spider, the Shelob Spider. You could have, some Mordor soldiers in there. You could have, the undead marsh elf and stuff in there. Just all the creatures. You could have the Nazgul and the Witch King in there because it's stuff that he encountered during the movie potentially. And he's not necessarily against or for them for the most part because he's kind of sent out to help them at the very beginning. So you could still say that maybe he's like leading Frodo and Sam away, but the problem is that if you're building a deck purely around him, that would have been before he met Frodo and Sam. So it'd just be white and or black and green. Now, if you do want Sam and Frodo in there, the only combinations you can really do are white and green. So you'd have to do the partner commanders of Sam and Frodo, which would have less flavor deck wise than Smeagol would be because with Smeagol, if you tempt yourself, you actually would get to mill people out, take their lands, and play big stuff for the most part. And if you do a Smeagol Helpful Guide deck, you could potentially do like all the Ents or other big creatures from decks that you would want for the most part. But if you do Frodo and Sam as the commander, Frodo, I believe, if you gain so much life, you get to draw a card, or the ring tempts you, or something like that. Sam, like every combat, you make a food token, and then there's something on there about sacking food tokens, I think. But that means that you could have um, basically Frodo and then Sam, and then you would have Smeagol as one of the 99. But then you'd have like the 3 or 4 golems that there are would be in the 99 as well. So you'd have like 3 or 4 Smeagols in there. You could have the Nazgul and stuff in there if you really wanted to, but you could also have Frodo Sauron's Bane inside of there, and then the regular Samwise Gamgee that just like brings someone's back. And then that would allow you to use wait, do those have the right colors? I think they have the right colors. Hold on. I think one of them's white black and one of them's white green. I need to double check. All right, so Magic the Gathering, uh, Frodo partner. Okay, so it's Frodo Adventurous Hobbit. Yeah, so white black partner with Sam loyal attendant has vigilance. Whenever Frodo Adventurous Hobbit attacks, if you gain 3 or more life this turn, the ring tempts you. Then, if Frodo is your ring bearer and the ring has tempted you 2 or more times this game, draw a card. So, not too bad. He's a 2-drop, Sam is a 3-drop, so you're going to be able to get Sam's ability on turn 3, then pay 2, activate the food token to then trigger the ring tempts you, which gives you the ring. This also means that if Smeagol hits the field, the food tokens are going to act as additional mills. So as soon as Smeagol hits the field, you're going to have Frogo, Smeagol, and Sam all in one deck. And this also means that you can use the Slip on the Ring ability. You can use Gandalf in there if you wanted to. Cause let me look real quick. Yeah, I mean, you could do that. You could technically use hobbits in there if you wanted to, but this is part of the reason why I'm not really expecting to use a hobbit deck anymore, because I looked at the hobbit deck. It doesn't really fit anything that feels flavorful for me for Lord of the Rings, and most of those I can probably buy fairly cheap, so I'm not super worried about it. But I think instead of just doing a Gollum deck, I'm gonna put Gollum in with Sam and Frodo. So that way we can have Sam and Frodo on that deck. We can have Gollum, we could have Smeagol and all 3 of the Golems. You'd probably have one copy of Frodo and Sam in there because you'd have Sauron's Bane, which would be a game-ending card. Then you'd have Samwise Gamgee, that would be a resurrection ability that could use on all of those. And then you'd have like basically ring tempts you cards. The whole deck would be about the ring tempting you for the most part. And then you would have probably Shelob. Like you'd want all the stuff that's Frodo based in that deck. So you'd have the both of the spiders probably in there. You could put the Nazguls in there if you wanted to, because you'd have ring temps, and the ring temps would cause them to get bigger. So it doesn't fully make sense that you would be, say, um, playing with the Nazgul, but in the sense that Sam and Frodo and Smeagol generally are running away from those threats and not necessarily fighting them in the movies, you could say that the whole thing with the deck is you're playing the story out of them going across the world or to Mordor or whatever is basically what would be going on. And although those creatures are on your side in Magic, it would be more or less that they're following you and they're fighting things for you while you're going towards the mountain, basically, is what it would seem like. But with you'd have white, black, green, and white. So you'd be able to put Legolas in there, but you wouldn't be able to put Gimli, which is a problem. You could put Aragorn, the white green Aragorn you could put in there. You could put the white Boromir in there, which would fit in with the story a bit. You could put Merry in there. You wouldn't be able to put Mary. Trying to look at this real quick. Okay, so Pippin, Warden of Isengard, is black and green, and Mary, Warden of Isengard, is white and green. So those two would go into the deck. So Pippin, Warden of Isengard, which also means you could technically use them as commanders in this deck as well. So you'd have Mary, Pippin, Sam and Frodo, and then the Golems would all be in there together. So you could put either of those as the commander. But Pippin, Warden of Isengard, so you got one and a green. You have to pay one to create a food token, but you can do it anytime, not just on combat. And you can sacrifice 4 food tokens. Other creatures you control get 3/3 and gain haste until end of turn, which probably isn't terrible. And then you got Mary, Warden of Isengard, partner with Pippin, Warden of Isengard. Whenever one or more artifacts enter the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 white soldier creature token with lifelink. So, potentially, if you put them as the commander, you could pay 1, make a food token every turn, and then make a 1/1 soldier with lifelink every turn. And then when Frodo or somebody pops in, you would be able to attack with the lifelink tokens, which would then um, uh, you'd be able to basically use them as extra life generation to trigger Frodo again. I still think Sam and Frodo would be the better commanders if you were to build this because basically Sam makes a free food token every turn anyway, which would trigger Mary, Warden of Isengard if they're on the field. And then if you have Pippin on the battlefield, you're going to be able to pay and make 2 food tokens in one turn. And then you could sacrifice and give your stuff haste when they enter, as well as get them that 3/3 ability, which would be pretty nice. So I think they're probably the best to put together. And this is how I feel the true Hobbit deck should be. I don't really care about all of the no-named Hobbits, but you're looking at um I don't recall if Frodo and Sam met. Yeah, they would have met Gimli at the Secret Council, the Fellowship or whatever, at the very beginning. So it kind of sucks there isn't a card that can get Gimli in there because he only has a red green and a red card, I think. There is a pure green dwarf, but Gimli. Yeah, because they have counter of kills and they have Mournful Avenger. Mournful Avenger would be the best, probably. Yeah. I know there is a green dwarf, though. Lord of the Rings dwarf. Dwarven Emissary. It's not it, though. Hmm. I know it's yeah, Bag-In Porter. It gets XX until end of turn where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. Yeah, it doesn't really fit though. So I don't know if having Aragorn and them in there would be the best. Or no, they got Marmadir Guardian. When it dies, the ring tempts you. Could potentially fit. Dwarf Soldier, 2 and a green. The dark, windless Mormir, there lies his crown in the water deep, till Durin awakes again from sleep. Gimli's song. Miromir Guardian. I would be tempted to put that in there because, like, in Frodo's story, with Frodo and Sam's adventure in their story, Gimli isn't really a big part of it. I don't think he was really a part of any of it for the most part. He was there for the Battle of Helm's Deep and Gondor, but he wasn't like a super involved character when it comes to the hobbits in the movie. They talked, I think, once at the council, so they might not even know his name. So this green dwarf might actually fit. So it's 2 and a green for a 4/2 dwarf soldier, and then when it dies, the ring tempts you, which would trigger Smeagol and stuff. This also means that you could put I think, only the green Legolas in, which Legolas is more known by them probably. Um, Legolas. All right, so they have a green, blue. So you got Master Archer. Targets a creature you don't control. Okay. So you could use the Master Archer, or you can do Legolas Greenleaf. I'd probably do Legolas Greenleaf for the card draw, if I'm going to be honest. So we got sort of a plan forming here, if we were to do that. So we'd have Frodo and Sam as the commanders. Then you'd have the Frodo and Sam, like Frodo Sours Bane and Samwise Gamgee as the secondary. Then you'd probably have Merry, Warden of Isengard, and Pippin, Warden of Isengard in there. Smeagol Helpful Guide with the 2 or 3 other Smeagols that are there. And then you'd have essentially all of the cards that they use in the movie. So like Pippin's bravery, potentially, slipping on the ring. I don't know if you'd do Pippin's bravery. You'd need cards that give you temptation, and then we'd have the uh, mithril armor for Frodo. We'd have the dwarf potentially in there, Legolas in there, um, the Trailblazer, the green white Aragorn in there. I already forgot what that is now. I need to read it. And then you could put the equipments in there because you could have Gandalf in there. Although I think Gandalf requires um, let's see, you have Gandalf, Friend of the Shire, that's blue. Then you have Gandalf the Grey, which is white or red and blue. So you wouldn't be able to play Gandalf the Grey, which kind of sucks because he was there for a good part of the movie, and they definitely know who Gandalf the Grey is. So you'd have Gandalf the White, but it copies things if a legendary creature entering the battlefield, I believe, triggers it. Alright, so yeah, company leader is the Aragorn that we could use for this. Just gonna read him real quick. Alright, so company leader is 1 green white. Whenever the ring tempts you, if you choose a creature other than Aragorn Company leader as your ring bearer, choice of counter from First Strike, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink on Aragorn. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on Aragorn, put 1 of each of those kind of counters on up to 1 other target creature. So, yeah. So basically, Aragorn would be a thing that would buff you. So all those cards that are tempting you would trigger Aragorn, and then you could give First Strike, Vigilance, Death Touch, and Lifelink to Aragorn and to someone else. So essentially, you'd make your creatures really strong. First Strike and Death Touch would basically be the thing. So once you get first strikes and death touch on him, you'd be able to swing in and kill most things pretty easy if it's going against other decks in the set. So he could also be a really good commander if you're going to build him by himself, to be honest, as well. But with these guys, way different because you know you're going to be able to get the equipments in there and everything else. So plus it would give you another source of life gain that would trigger Frodo. Because whenever you gain 3 or more life this turn, the ring tempts you. So if someone attacks you, you can block, gain 3 life, the ring tempts you. This is also something interesting because like the Watcher and the Water card, it requires you to draw cards on your opponent's turn, and there's not really that many ways to do that. In the Lord of the Rings decks, there's like a few cards that do, and it would trigger it. But that card could potentially be really strong if you had a lot of card draw. Like I would make a Watcher in the Water deck just by itself with just card draw because that thing would be really powerful by itself. But yeah, but on this subject though, because that's going to be the Hobbit deck that we're going to make down the road. That also means that you could take Smeagol out and do whatever. But we're trying to make decks with purely just the cards that came out with the Lord of the Rings set. And although there are a number of Ents that are outside of Lord of the Rings that you could use, and Elves and all that stuff, I want to keep it all with Lord of the Rings cards. So Smeagol Helpful Guide, although we could use him as his own commander and he'd be really powerful, um, you'd basically need to bring you'd need 9 Nazgul and the Witch King, so you'd have like 10 of those. Then you have the Wraith card, which would be, 11. And then you couldn't put Frodo or anyone in there, so you'd have like the 4 golems, so that'd be like 15. And then you'd have the 2 spiders, so you'd be like 17. And then you'd have potentially the Ents or elves or um, orcs that trigger temptation. So you'd be looking at like 20 or so, probably. But if you get Frodo on the field with Gollum, I mean, at the bare minimum, you're drawing cards. And then when Gollum comes out, I think you have to attack to trigger it still. But basically, even if you attack with Frodo, then if Frodo is your ring bearer, so you have to get him, you have to get temptation to get the ring onto Frodo. Basically, the temptation would be a way to trigger Frodo even though you don't have Sam on the field. And that would allow you to draw a card. And then when you get Smeagol, it'd allow you to ramp and steal everybody's stuff and mill them. But then you could cast things that would say put creatures on the battlefield from your opponent's graveyards, which would be really powerful. When like just Smeagol alone could be really powerful with just graveyard recursion. But I'm thinking with Sam and Frodo. All right. So first off, you have Sam and Frodo as commanders. So you get 2 commanders. So you get 2 cards basically for free early game. Then you got Sam and Frodo originals, Merry and Pippin. So you're already at 6, and then you have like the 4 Smeagol, so you're at 10, and then you have the Nazguls and stuff, so you're sitting at like 21. You know, uh, what else was there? You could potentially do Aragorn, uh, Legolas and Gimli. You could do the orcs, other things, the 2 spiders. You'd be setting closer to 30 creatures at that point. And then you could have your recursion spells and all your targeted temptation spells and everything else. And the worst case is Frodo comes in, Sam comes down, you make a food token, trigger the ring onto Frodo, and then you attack every turn. And you use a Ring Tempts You card to trigger Frodo to draw an extra card, looking for Gollum, basically. Probably not as good as Gollum would be, potentially, but I think thematically it fits a little bit more with the game. Now, when it comes to our human deck and stuff that we had before, we were missing cards, but we did put together a deck specifically for Gundor and Rohan as the Fellowship for with Aragorn before. And there's a couple cards that were missing, but for the most part, it feels really, really good with the movie. And the spells and stuff, even though it's not the most powerful deck in the world, thematically it feels really good, and it feels um, pretty fluid as well. And it's not like so weak that you can't play it at all. I won a game the other day versus three pretty decent decks. Just because you can burn people and stuff with it pretty easy, as well as like there's 4 or 5 ways to get unblockable in that deck, as well as green spells like buffing you for 4/4, and like you get a scry and you get to make extra tokens and all that stuff. So like the deck can pop off pretty fast if you have the right stuff down. But all these decks aren't meant to be super crazy fast, powerful. So that's part of the deal. So with the Sauron deck that we had, basically, I had all the cards from the precon shoved in there, and I kind of sorted it to where I thought it fit a little bit better. But now I'm starting to break it apart even more because, like, basically these Corsairs, I think we need some of these in the deck. So I took this one out before, but pay one, draw a card, then discard a card. There's also a Goblin that does that. So essentially, on Saruman's side, uh, you have goblins and stuff that you can use. So you can get a free spellcast goblin, or you can get um, the Moria Scavenger that can discard a card and draw a card. And then on the Mordor side, you're gonna have um, Hostage Taker, which can take over a creature and let you cast it. And then you can have like the Captain Corsair of Umbar, which is going to let you draw a card and discard a card. So you were doing parallels now. And then Saruman, the many colors I had in the deck, and I didn't realize that it didn't fit in the deck because it has white. So I can't use that. So if you're going to make a Saruman deck that's solo by itself, you would put that card. Um, you put that card as your commander, basically, because you can't use the Saruman of many colors and Saruman the White Hand in the same deck. So Saruman the White Hand goes in the Mordor deck. Saruman the many colors will be the mono Saruman commander when we make that deck in the future. And I think it's interesting how they got some of these cards set up. So now I'm starting to understand how some of these things work because like the Golem deck, for instance, that Sam card that resurrects a creature and tempts you or whatever, thematically doesn't fit in any of these other decks. But with the Gollum deck, it would fit because Sam brings back Frodo and stuff in there, and also Gollum was thrown down a mountain, and so you could say that him going to get Frodo is both resurrecting Frodo as well as resurrecting the Gollum if you wanted to. But at a Frodo deck, you could use that and it would make sense 100% because you have Sam right there, and then Sauron's Bane and all those things would make more sense in that deck compared to any other deck, which is why I don't use the Sam Resurrection in the Mordor deck or any other one because it only fits where there's black and it doesn't fit thematically black on those things. Now, uh, interesting enough though, the Mordor deck can't use one of the spider cards, so there is that. We also do not have the wraiths, so we don't have the wraiths and whatchamacallit, the Nazgul in this deck. So when I built this deck originally, I put in stuff like this, the Birthday Escape, because it's cheap, it draws a card, it tempts you, which triggers Sauron. Now, thematically, what I did here was this is Bilbo putting the ring on to escape the birthday party. So it fits in with a good deck, but for me, it also fits in for the bad deck because this is where the Nazgul and stuff were alerted to the ring and started looking for it. So you had the combination of Gollum and him using this ring uh, that would trigger it. So I say that that could fit technically in the deck for me, but however, these cards are probably going to be replaced with Nazgul in the future because I believe that Sauron, the deck, if you're going to make it thematic for the movie, it needs to be more about creatures than anything else. for the most part, and you need the ring Tempchu stuff. So basically, you're trying to put creatures into your graveyard, and then you're trying to use a big spell and bring them all out and swarm the board. And then instead of doing what other people are saying, where you amass an army and then you sack it, and then you just keep amassing armies and sacking it and using it for graveyard fodder, we're going more in line with the movie. So like some of the other stuff, we took out some of the mana rocks and things because Sauron does cost a little bit to get out onto the field. However, he's fairly difficult to remove, so I don't really think you need as much mana unless someone board wipes you. But like things like Everflowing Chalice we could potentially remove because even though it does fit for the most part, and I think this is where they're filling up the bomb or something that blows up Helm's Deep's wall. I don't know. I think it's potentially better in a Saruman deck. And then you have like the Giver, the mini Giver or whatever, the so Sauron like giving rings to everybody. I think that could technically fit in pretty much any deck. So you could do it in his deck if you wanted. It's a pretty hefty spell or something like that. But then you have like Forbidden Alchemy, um, which is Saruman. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, the rest in the graveyard, and it has flashback. That's potentially a card that could fit in this deck. But then you got like Urukai Berserker. So Urukai Berserker works in the precon and stuff just fine. I don't have a problem with this because with Sauron, specifically, if any of the other commanders, this card would be terrible. But with Sauron as our commander, it's pay 3 for a 3/2 Orc Berserker, and then the Ring Tempchu, which lets you discard your hand and then draw 4 cards. So this is basically, pay for a body and draw 4 cards. So that's fine, and I think it works fine in the deck. And it's a creature, which means you can bring it back later, which would then tempt you, and then you could discard and draw more cards over and over and over again, basically as much as you want. So those big resurrection spells, if all your things tempt you, then you're going to be able to go through your hand very quickly. And also, it says you may discard your hand. So basically, you can just keep discarding until you find something that fits, and then stop discarding, and then just hold on to your hand for a while. Would be fine. Now, for a deck like this, you need. We got some things that we got to still figure out here. So potential ads are going to be the 9 Nazgul. So we got just enough cards removed from the deck for those 9 Nazgul. Um, and I need to add in the Earthquake and the other mass removal spell that we put into the good deck. I think those thematically can fit in either deck because the way they've worded it. The Earthquake, it destroys every creature on the field basically. Um, so I think it works, but it's not like the best thing, when it comes down to it. But it fits into the good deck and it fits into the evil deck perfectly fine. And then the other one's Blasphemous Act. So the wordage on that, it shows the orcs cutting down the trees. So you could say it's Saruman's spell to like destroy everything on the field. But then conversely, you could say it's the Ents destroying Isengard. So I think both of those can thematically fit in both decks, and they should be used in the Mordor deck specifically because we got a uh, Fall of Car Andros. So lore-wise, the Fall of Car Andros was the final battle in the movie. Mordor sent out a small force to attack and flank on Gondor, and then they basically destroyed this and they ran off or something. So there's still evilness out in the world. But this is whenever a creature an opponent controls is dealt excess non-combat damage amass orcs X, where X is the excess combat or the excess damage, and you can pay 8 and it deals 7 damage to target creature. So you're going to be able to amass a big orc army off of this and remove people's stuff pretty easy. But both of those board wipes still damage to all creatures. So if you have this on the field and you use either of those spells, it's going to hit everything for a massive amount of damage, and then you're going to get a massive army off of this card. So that's like a really big benefit to having that card. And then the other spell, so the card that's going to go in both the Sauron deck and the Mordor deck that is specific to Sauron is Subjugate the Hobbits, which gives you control of everything with power under 3. Um, then there's going to be those two mass board wipe effects in the deck for sure, and then there's going to be let me see if I can find it. Because there's a bunch of board wipes that you can put in these decks for sure. The wrong stack. The other one is a flavor card where it talks about opening a gate in the name of Mordor with the mouth of Sauron. It's called Fear Fire Foes. So this is the other one. Damage cannot be prevented this turn, and it deals X damage to target creature. So you can make a big army off that, and then 1 damage to each other creature with the same controller. So it's not as big of a thing, but it's something that's flavorful for Mordor. Looks pretty cool. All that stuff works. So the main cards of the deck are all right here. These are the ones where we've now separated the different creatures that are focused into 3 different key categories. Um, and then potential cuts for the deck is Languish, because this is about basically a sickness or something. It's not necessarily like the ring doesn't tempt you. It is -4 to all creatures. It sounds more like a Nazgul thing or something if you're going to do a Nazgul deck, because they don't care about the ring tempting you. They care about sorcery spells. You could also put this in a Saruman deck because he cares more about sorcery costs and stuff like that. Then we have Bitter Downfall, which we had in this in here because it does still kind of fit thematically, but this is Boromir dying, in the card art. So the temptation is there. I think it fits more in like a Frodo deck or just a Mordor deck in general, not necessarily in this one, so it's a potential cut. Feed the Swarm is a destroy target creature or enchantment an opponent controls, you lose life equal to its permanent's mana value. It's a good card. I don't think it's terrible for 2 mana, but the main thing here is that this is more of an Isengard card. So it wasn't a deck, and it does fit because we have Sauron in here. However, in the grand scheme of things, this fits more in a Sauron like deck in and of itself by itself. Um, so I don't think we necessarily have to have this in here, and I would replace this probably with a Nazgul. Then we have Mordor Trebuchet. I think this fits potentially just better in a Nazgul deck. Because in the Lord of the Rings movies, I don't recall that many trebuchets until I think the Gondor fight. So this would go into a Mordor deck, potentially into the Nazgul deck if you're going to make a solo Nazgul deck. But when it comes to Sauron in general, I don't know if this is necessarily good enough because it's just an army attacks and it makes a 2/1 thing. It'd be cool if you could have like 9 of these in a deck or something too. I would prefer that more than anything, but a token that's tapped and attacking, not a big deal. I also think that this would fit really good in a Smeagol deck. Not necessarily that lore-wise it would fit, but because your creature becomes an artifact, and then at the end sacrifice, and it would trigger Smeagol, which would give you more temptations and stuff like that. So it'd be really good in Smeagol. The next one, we got the Isolation of Orthanc. So this is something that we're potentially going to remove as well, because you put a creature on someone's library, but it's 4 mana, and this is where Sauron like tricked and then isolated Gandalf at the very first of the movie. So I think it belongs more into a Saruman deck than a Mordor deck for sure. And then the next one is Fact or Fiction, which lets you separate 2 things, and someone puts one of those in your hand and the rest in your graveyard, I believe. So I think that's potentially useful in this deck just to get things in your graveyard. But if you look at it, it's the Wormtongue taking over the mind of uh, Theoden. So it could fit in the deck. It's not the best. It's potentially still good because you get a card draw as well as put things in your graveyard, which fits this probably better than Sauron does in general, but it's not bad, but it's a potential cut for Nazgul as well. I'm gonna go ahead and swap one of these out. So I remember to put the pirate in the deck. And then we ended up cutting the Watcher in the water because we need things that tempt us a bit more on the enemy's turn. We have to draw cards in the enemy's turn. But with Sauron, it's basically like most of the things are sorceries, so you need something that tempts you um on the enemy's turn, which would be card draw basically. Like you need an instant tempt card to let you draw 4 cards and then make 4 tentacles. If we can figure that out, it would go back in the deck. Monstrosity of the Lake could stay in, but probably not. If we're doing these, we're probably going to do them on uh, the Isengard deck. Because it talks about drawing cards in your opponent's turn. So, I mean, if you find a way to do that, we could do that. We also took out this some of these Orcs cards. I mean, you could put Goblins in there if you wanted. We took out Boon of the Wishgiver, which is potentially a fairly solid card for this deck. And we got Basalt Monument and Mind Stone that we took out for now, because I don't think we need the mana, but we'll see. And Haunt of the Dead Marshes, which I think fits in better with a um, uh, Golem deck. So you could use it to die and then resurrect itself over and over again. You could still technically stick it in here if you needed some graveyard fodder. Because basically you could have this here, and then if you didn't want to sacrifice something, you could use a spell and use this as fodder to get rid of it, or a chump blocker, and then it's just going to come right back next turn for 3 mana. So it could still potentially fit in the deck, but not necessarily needed. What I'm finding in this deck is originally I had put in removal spells that don't necessarily sacrifice my creatures. However, I'm finding that that's probably a good thing to have in the deck because you need a few cards that you can sacrifice creatures to in case when you're using your big orc army to like smash into stuff, chump blockers are going to get in the way just in general, so that's a problem. But the other part is if they stop it from being able to be attacked or whatever, so then you can sack it and start rebuilding another army. And I think that's important to have. So like the Lash of the Balrog, something that I didn't really worry about or use originally, actually does fit better in this deck than say that Boromir removal card, because on the off chance I can pay the mana cost, or I can just sack my army and then destroy something and amass some more soldiers. So it works pretty well, I think. But we can only use one Shelob, so we got the other Shelob because this deck also seems to care about killing people's stuff and bringing them in over on your side. If I was going to add, because my other deck has one card that's outside of the game in it, if I was going to do 1 or 2 cards outside of the game for each deck, I'd do like Debtor's Nail or something like that. Thematically, it kind of seems like it fits and also lets you bring back a card from people's graveyard to your side of the field. So useful. It fits the theme. Like used multiple times, so all that would be pretty good. Pretty big mana cost, so it would trigger Saruman. And make like a 6-drop orc army when you used it. So if you're doing like a Saruman like only deck, you could still use that in there and still make a big army using it and get to bring people stuff back. So I think all that's fine. But I will show you how the deck is separated right now. So there is potential for cuts here, but basically Sauron the mini colors couldn't fit, so we put in Sauron the white as a secondary drop to basically this. And what you'll notice is, so Sauron, the Dark Lord, is our commander of the deck. But inside of the deck, we have 2 of each character, basically, as secondaries. So Sauron the Dark Lord is the main commander. Then we have Sauron, Lord of the Rings, the original commander of the deck, as one of the 99. And then we have Sauron the Necromancer as the weaker version of Sauron Lord of the Rings in the 99. This is also one that would be more focused on Nazguls than anything, because they make wraiths. So if we can finish that, and then we have the person that's underneath him, the Mouth of Sauron. Okay, and then the cards that are spell-wise focused on Sauron himself. We have One Ring to rule them all, so that's his ability that we're saving for him. Then we have Lidless Gaze, which lets us, bring creatures to our side, basically. And then we have that uh, Fear Fire Foes card, which is basically a single target removal as well as um, chump block removal, essentially. That could also trigger and make us a little army if we wanted to. And then the secondary, so basically, so that's Sauron, the main guy. And then you're going to have two branches for the Nazgul and for Sauron. So the next one is Lord of the Nazgul. So this is going to be the Nazgul side of things. Then the Witch King is the secondary of them. Okay, and this also gives you kind of a blueprint if you're going to make those decks for yourself. Now, for their spells, we're probably going to have a bunch of Nazguls. So you don't necessarily need to run the spells that we have for these guys because they don't, 100% fit or nor care about what these are. But the first one is Ring Wraiths. So it's just this card that lets you search out your library for something that has the same colors as your commander. So basically anything in this deck. Pretty good. That's their card because they're searching for stuff. That's their ability. Then we have Extract from Darkness. So it's basically taking somebody over with the power of the rings and stuff, turning them into wraiths. Something like that, which is what they try to do to Frodo, I believe, when they stabbed him. Like he would die and turn into a wraith at some point. And then we have Shadow of the Enemy. So that's just exile creature cards from target player's graveyard, cast spells among those cards for as long as they remain exiled. So another way to get rid of people's graveyard as well as give stuff to yourself. Fits pretty well. And then I have their last spell for that side is Into the Darkness, Bind Them, which is basically create a Wraith tokens with Menace in the Ring Tempshu. So that's going to trigger Sauron, or yeah, Sauron, yeah, for 3 turns. And then each opponent gain control up to 1 target creature that player controls up until untap those creatures, they gain haste and the Ring Tempshu. So you get 4 Ring Temps, 4 potential hand draws there. So you can see that Sauron himself is more worried about like taking over creatures, destroying creatures, drawing cards, stuff like that. And also mill. So like Mouth of Sauron, we could just target ourselves if we wanted to. Sauron the Necromancer is just exiling a creature card from your graveyard and then making it a Wraith token. So you can see that the Wraiths, though, are more focused on making more Wraiths, taking over creatures, turning them into Wraiths, exiling graveyards, or searching out for a legendary card, you know. So that's their style of play in this deck. And then the next one that we have for the Wraiths is Gollum Patient Plotter. So he's in this deck as sacrifice fodder if we need sacrifice fodder, because it also makes the ring tempt you. So when he's on the field, we can use him as a chump blocker, or we can sacrifice him to one of our spells, or we can sacrifice him to draw cards, and then we can sack a creature and return Gollum from your graveyard to your hand. So the Nightmare Elf is potentially better for this for us if we want to sack it to draw cards, but we can't trigger everything with that. But Gollum, bringing it back from the graveyard to our hand, we can sack our orc army if we need to, if it gets stalled out and we can't use it anymore, and bring this back. So it's basically there just to help us get rid of our orc army if we need to, and it's a little bit better, I think, than the elf because the elf actually tempts you. But the elf does let you scry 1, so it's okay, not terrible. Now we go into a couple of the creatures. So the creatures in here aren't 100%, but we got a couple of them that are thematic to those areas. So we got uh, Gorbag of Menace Mortal. So that's part of the Witch King stuff. And then whenever a goblin or orc you control deals combat damage to a player, you may sacrifice it. When you do, choose one, and it's draw a card or create a treasure token. I could see value in this, but I don't really know if it necessarily matters. Basically, what would happen is if you're going to have this card on the field, you would put it down, you'd swing in with your orc army, and you would hit with it, which would trigger Sauron, and then you would use this to sack your orcs, and then you would draw a card or whatever, I guess, which would make you discard it and then draw a card, or you could trade a treasure token. And then you would make, because Sauron gets tempted after that, you would then make another orc army. And it'd basically be like your army having vigilance or something. But I don't know if it's worth it or not, but it does fit, and it is ministerial stuff, and it is a way to kill you off your army if you needed to. Although it's not necessarily super useful, probably a potential cut, if we're going to be honest. Now we get into the third part of the Evil Mordor deck. So right now we have Saruman, the White Hand, because the other one doesn't fit in this because of the colors. So I guess the other one is before he turned evil. All right. So we got Saruman, the White Hand, and then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Mass works X, where X is that spell's mana value. And then goblins and orcs you control have ward 2. So this is interesting because it can protect your stuff, but also he cares about big spells to make big armies. And the Witch King, or the Lord of the Nazgul, cares about casting pretty much any spell to make a wraith. So for the most part, we want big spells in here that makes a big army and can potentially make us one wraith. But if you're doing a Nazgul army with the Lord of the Nazgul, you just want small spells, like a 1-drop that makes a wraith on top of it potentially. All right, and then underneath, I don't have them directly in here, but basically under him we have the Uruk-hai, the White Hand. Potentially you could cut these. I don't think they're super necessary. However, Uruk-hai, the White Hand, and Uruk-hai Captain. Basically, when things die or you're putting 1/1 counters on stuff for like an army, they're essentially backup armies. It's 2 creatures that grow just like your normal army does. And it's just if you sack your army, these guys are still going to be around. So instead of having 1 army, you're going to be able to have 3 armies, which I'm not opposed to. I don't really think it matters a whole lot. You could remove them if you wanted. Next, under Saruman the White Hand, you have Saruman the White, so that's going to be just like the movie. And he has Ward 2. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, a mass works 2. So, are you going to cast 2 spells every turn? I don't know. Does he need to be in the deck? Probably not. The same goes into the Witch King of Agmar. You don't necessarily need him in the deck. It's just because if you have him, he's a flyer. You get attacked, they destroy the creature that attacked you, and then the ring tempts you. So it has some flavor, but it's not necessary into the deck. So you don't necessarily need Saruman the White or um, the Witch King of Agmar in here. But if you cast 2 spells, you get a mass orcs 2, so you could potentially make a big creature very quickly. And then if he's on the field, you could get 2 spells off potentially. Next is Moria Scavenger. So this is their version of discard a card, draw the card. If the discarded card is a creature card, you can mass orcs 1. So not as good, or it's a little bit better probably than the Corsair, but not the biggest deal. I don't think you necessarily need these though because they're useful in the deck for getting stuff in the graveyard and drawing an extra card and getting through it quicker. But if you have enough tempt you cards, your commander's going to do it for you anyway. Like you're going to discard your hand and draw 4 cards every turn. So like this Moria Scavenger, you can tap it once a turn, discard a card, draw a card, and then create an orc if it was a creature token, or if it was a creature, but it has Death Touch, which means it could be a chump blocker. So you could keep it up as a chump blocker and then come around and then tap it and discard a card and then draw a card. But if say you replace this with a Nazgul, it comes in, you have your commander down, the Nazgul hits, triggers a bunch of 1/1 counters on everything. The ring tempts you, which triggers Sauron, and then you're gonna discard your hand, draw 4 cards. So that one Nazgul would replace this card, basically with one rotation. Like it would take 4 turns for you to catch up with this card, potentially. The mana cost is the same. The Nazgul has Death Touch as well as gives 1/1 counters to all of the wraiths. So you'd probably swap all these out with Nazguls because it's very difficult to get rid of Sauron. If he was harder to get rid of, I think these would probably be keeps. Now we got Grima, Sauron's Footman. So this is the person that's underneath Sauron or Saruman. He's the person that's underneath Saruman. Can be blocked when it deals combat damage to a player. The player exiles the top card of their library until they exile instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then the player puts the exile cards that weren't cast this way in the bottom of the library random order. Now I don't think you necessarily need him in the deck. We were cutting him out to put him into the other deck and replace him with the other card, which is Grima Wormtongue, which fits a little bit more thematically into the deck, if we're going to be completely honest. But opponents can't gain life, which would hurt pretty much everybody at your table. And then tap, sack another creature, target player loses 1 life, and the sacrificed creature was legendary in Mass Orcs 2. So basically, he was in here because he's underneath Saruman, he's mono black. Stops your opponents from gaining life, which is useful, but mainly here for a creature sack outlet. So in case we need to get rid of an army, we can sack them, and then they lose 1 life, and then basically the army would be a ring bearer. You sack the army, and then you would amass Orcs 2 to replace the army very quickly. And I think that's how we'd use that in this deck. However, the other color combination is a 4-drop, can't be blocked. Probably fits in better with the Sauron deck in general that just lets you attack and keep drawing, casting spells and copying spells and all that stuff. But both of them are in there. Next, we have Saruman Summons because it fits him really good. Amass Orcs X, mill X cards. You cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value extra less from among them without paying its mana cost. So potentially really useful, something that you can use to dump a lot of things into your graveyard, cast a spell that recurs creatures or something, and then also get a good amount of creatures from here, which is pretty good. And then Storm of Saruman, not necessarily something that you need in this deck because it's not the biggest deal in the world. It's better in the Saruman of many colors deck potentially. Also fits in more thematically, but it's enchantment with Ward 3, which is already kind of weird. And then whenever you cast your second spell each turn, copy it, except the copy isn't legendary. So it's basically a Helm of the Host, but you want to cast your second spell. So even if I did like a Witch King, say like I cast like a basic orc, and then I cast a Witch King or a Balrog or whatever, it's gonna make 2 basically, which is pretty interesting. And then the last one for Sauron is the Subjugate the Hobbits. So that's his take over all the weak stuff card, and thematically it's going to fit in a little bit better. Now, out of those, there's probably 1 or 2 that we could potentially cut out of there if we really wanted to. Then we have potentially Captain of Umber and the Moria Scavenger that we could remove. So that'd be 2 cards. Then we potentially have Urkai Berserker, Everflowing Chalice, and Forbidden Alchemy, which would be let's see, we had 2, 4, 7, and then we have 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 potential cuts from the deck, which means that we have 9 Nazgul that could fit in perfectly well, and then we would have, like 3. Yeah, 3 more cards that we could stick in. So one of those are going to be Earthquake, and one of them will be Blasphemous Act. And then the other one, if I was going to do it, would be the one outside card, which I said that I could do because I did it in the other deck, which would probably be Debtor's Nail. Something along those lines. And that would complete the evil movie story deck for this, for the most part, I think. All in all, though, I think I did pretty decent. But I think it's really interesting how they got these things set up, you know. And we still got some things that work a little bit more. Like we got spells like Sauron's Trickery that we could replace, but it's counter target spell and then a mass orcs 1, so it fits in with the deck fine. Um, Basically it's the same thing as the way they have the cards made really has things to where like how to explain this? Like the way they have the cards set up is like there's alternate versions of the same scene that both would make sense, but a little bit of nuance to where it would probably matter. Like, so the exiled Orthonac would be Sauron banishing Gandalf to the top of the tower. And that was when he first turned. So it would fit better in the Sauron the Many Colors, potentially. But you could also technically use it in a Gandalf deck. However, Gandalf didn't exile himself. So I need to read the art again, wherever it is. Yeah, Saruman's Trickery is the same ordeal. The main thing is that Saruman's Trickery produces orcs and it costs 3. So if he's on the field, you'd use Sauron's Trickery and then you get a counter target spell and a 4/4 orc alone would be pretty good by itself. And then Isolation at Orthnak, it's Gandalf, and it says put target creature in its owner's library second from the top. So like you could use it as a protection spell for Gandalf potentially as well, but because you could say this is Gandalf recalling the memory, and you potentially could use it, but it'd probably make more sense in a Sauron deck that's purely Sauron. Like if you're looking at this from, so our commander, if we put ourselves in the mindset, if our commander is Sauron, what's up, Sean Rover? I got about 15 minutes before I have to go outside, but welcome, welcome. But our commander is Sauron the Dark Lord in this deck. So if we're looking at it from his eyes, right, and we're building this deck, the isolation at Orthnach is Saruman taking Gandalf and sticking him on a tower and banishing him, right? But if you were Sauron, you would just know that Saruman dealt with Gandalf. So something like Saruman's trickery would make a little bit more sense. Where it's like, okay, Saruman dealt with Gandalf, he's gone, you know. And then if you're running a Saruman deck, you could run both of them. And I think how you position your mind is kind of how they made the cards, if it makes any sense. Like Shelob, for instance, is just this big spider, and it's in the precon. Uh, Whenever a non-token creature an opponent controls dies, exile it, and then you can pay 3, put creature card exiled to Shelob directly into its owner's graveyard, and then you can put 2/1/1 counters on Shelob and draw a card, or you can pay and put target creature card with mana value X with Shelob onto the battlefield tapped under your control. So in Mordor's mind, like in Sauron's mind and stuff, I mean, he might not necessarily know much about this spider, but it's probably there in the background, just kind of they kind of know about it or whatever. But in the other version, Because this one's Dreadweaver, and the other version of the card is red, or it's black and green, I think, and it's Shelob, you know, child of Uzmoth or whatever, right? So then you're like, why is that important? But when you look at Gollum, or Smeagol Helpful Guide, green black, he's the one that knew about the spider and where it was and what it does and how it eats, and he's been around long enough to potentially know who the spider's parents were or whatever, basically. So in my head, I'm like, that actually makes a little bit more sense. And then if you were doing a Smeagol Helpful Guide deck and you weren't doing Frodo or anything like that, the one outside card I would put in, there's like snaring webs, something like that. And it's basically around like the same theme I would do probably. But it's just like when you look at the cards, just kind of like think about the movie and the position of each character, and then the cards actually like fit those themes very, very well, and it's very weird. So like Aragorn, the Uniter, in my deck, I have just enough room to put all of the iconic spells from the movies, all of the things with Rohan and Gundor and all that stuff is in the deck, and it fits just perfectly almost. There's a couple of small changes that I can make because, like Isamir, I have no idea who that dude was in the movie, and I think he's only in the books, so he could be a complete remove from the deck. I'm missing a few cards that aren't in there, but like I have Gandalf the White in the deck, and technically I have Glamdring I could put in the deck, and I could put Gimli's axe in the deck, and I could put Legolas's bow in the deck or whatever. But with Aragorn, you could do that, or you could put Aragorn's sword in there, the Sword of the King, which would fit his thematic stuff more, and it makes spirits. Because you can't put the King of the Undead Army in Aragorn's deck, but you can put that sword in Aragorn's deck. Whereas the King of the Army commands the undead and goes and does stuff, and he would have to fight for Aragorn in the movie, and he wouldn't have equipments because they don't have anything, so it's not that big of a deal. With Aragorn, he doesn't like the sword is what gets the spirits to fight for you. If he didn't have the sword, they would have killed him. So he isn't in the deck. Just like Denethor, that white black steward, he isn't able to be in that deck either. But that would have been Denethor, you know, as his self in the movie. So the Denethor that's in our Uniter deck is Denethor the Seer or whatever. And thematically, it fits in with Aragorn the Uniter because you go in and he's mono blue. Something happens when he enters. I don't remember, but you can tap and sack him and do 3 damage to a creature, like a removal creature, and then you become the monarch. And in the movie, he kills him, like he dies, and then he takes over Gundor. So thematically, it makes more sense, right? Whereas Denethor, the black white guy, Steward of Gundor, it's like if one of your creatures dies, you get to make another creature, and then like you draw a card, like there's a life lost or something, you get to draw a card or something like that. But it's basically just one person dies and then you get to replace them. So you just like want to kill one person every turn. But if you were going to build him into a deck, the only thing that he really fits into is the Oathbreakers, which would make sense because he's scummy in the first place, or he'd be the leader of Gundor himself, and then you would have your Gundor soldiers basically in front of you, and then you'd use them as chump blockers, and then every time you chump block one thing, you'd replace the soldier afterwards, and you get that effect. Or you would have to have him as like um what else could you stick in there? You could put like Frodo, Sauron's Bane and stuff in there, but that's just getting crazy with it. I'm just saying that they've actually separated the cards into categories decently well. Like this card with Boromir, that's a removal. Um, it's 3 and a black. This spell costs 3 less to cast if it targets a creature that was dealt damage this turn, which is just kind of what Boromir was doing in the movie, sort of. And you destroy target creature its controller loses 2 life. So like on one hand, it's a black card, so you can't use it in a fellowship deck for the most part or anything like that. It doesn't make sense. But then they have Boromir that's mono white that sacrifices himself to give everyone else destructible. So this is basically like Boromir and Boromir and uh, Denethor or Mordor, all of them would have seen it more along this line compared to the Boromir creature card, which is like a noble sacrifice and gives everything protection. You know, it's just weird, like weird stuff like that that you just got to kind of think about, and it actually is pretty good. And like some of these cards, they would be good if there's like a equipment deck that you were facing, like Shagroot Loot Bear. It would be okay, but it's not very good if you don't have equipments, you know? But if you were going up against like a fellowship deck, like say you had that Frodo deck and you had the dwarf and Legolas and all them, and then you had like Stinger and you had Gandalf in there and uh I already forgot what Gandalf, Glamdring, Aragorn's sword, you would have the Mithril coat, Bilbo's ring, you'd have like 6, 7 equipments in there potentially. Um, he could be a better person, you know. And also in their storyline, he was one of the more bigger threats they have. Because like when you think about Frodo and Sam and stuff in their journey, I mean, they go from the Shire, they run into the Nazgul. I mean, they go along forever. Eventually, they run in, like, they get separated from the Fellowship. Gandalf and them, like, Gandalf dies. All of them go away. The Fellowship kind of separate, and they're by themselves after that. So, like, their main threats that they would have faced is the Balrog, the Nazgul. They run into the Witch King once. I think it was the Witch King. It was the Witch King or a Fell Beast. I don't remember. And then you would have um, the Spider, and you would have Shagroot. So you have like 5 creatures that they faced in their journey to Mordor, which is kind of interesting. Um, but he couldn't. But like, if you go from the Smeagol's point of view, and he did a Smeagol deck with no hobbits or anything in it, um, Smeagol would have been the ring was lost. He gets tortured by the Nazgul and stuff, so he would have ran into the Nazgul. Then he gets sent on the thing and runs into, I don't remember when they met, but he runs into Frodo and Sam at some point, and then that whole thing goes down. So from his point of view, he would have Nazgul, Sam, and Frodo, and then you would still have the Witch King and the Nazgul they run into later, Shagroot, the spider, and then like the nightmare elf in the water. I guess you could count that, but it's only like a few things. So like in his deck, and his thing too is like if you're looking from Frodo and Sam's point of view, those are things that they had to face and kill or whatever. They're things that are like bad juju. But in Gollum's point of view, he's like moving the pieces on the board, like he's manipulating the creatures to get them to do stuff for him. So like if you made a Gollum deck, you're taking people's lands, you're making them mill things. You could potentially take things out of their graveyard. And although it might not make sense for Gollum to have soldiers underneath his command or something, it makes sense that those soldiers could be there and Gollum is getting them to do something for him. I think it could potentially be seen that way. And then like the spider can be in your deck. The Nightmare Elf can be in your deck. You could put orcs in your deck if you wanted to, because there's orcs in the movie that they face. You can't put Shamroot in there, but it's just an interesting how the perspective of the deck can completely change all the deck cards. All right, so we got to put all these up, and then I go outside for the next check. Um, But since Sauron of the many colors can't go into the Sauron deck, I'll probably try and make a deck based around this at some point in the future as well. So that's gonna be a thing. The thing with the Lord of the Ring, like how they got this set up, is if you're only using Lord of the Ring cards and Lord of the Ring art, it's actually I could see these cards like selling out or something. Like if you try to make a deck based around each person, it's like the Hobbits. Like I don't care about the Hobbit cards, but like you could do Merry and Pippin as a commander. You could do like I think that like they have it separated enough to where you can like my Fellowship deck with Aragorn as the leader has like Frodo and Sam in there, like one version of them. But if you do a Hobbit deck, it also has Merry and Pippin in there, one version of them. But then the Hobbit deck has different versions of Sam, Frodo, Merry and Pippin, different versions of Gollum. Um, and then if you go from making the Hobbit deck, which you could play completely different from the Smeagol deck, and you made so Smeagol would be in the Hobbit deck, but then you could take Smeagol and make his own deck, and they'd be completely different play from each other. Because like the Hobbit deck, you could have more equipments in. Like I would have all the equipments in the Hobbit deck. I would have Gandalf the White potentially in there. I actually need to read that really quick before we go. I'm gonna look it up because I don't remember exactly what it says. Dolph the White. I know it has to do with legendaries. I wish instead of buying the collector packs, I would have bought the card art packs, the ones that make the big things. So Gandalf the White. The only thing I don't like is that you can't put Gandalf the Grey or the Friend of the Shire into the Hobbit deck, which kind of sucks. But I guess you could say that maybe that starts after they separated because they're in the Fellowship deck, and then when the Fellowship gets separated, then you could say the Hobbit deck took over because that's actually probably the best way to think about it, actually. So you'd play Aragorn the Uniter into the Fellowship deck, and then after the Fellowship breaks apart, that's when the Frodo deck would take over, and then they run into Smeagol, and then Merry and Pippin separate into the Ents and all that stuff. And then you would go so far, and then when Smeagol gets separated from Frodo and Sam and turns into their enemy, that's where the Smeagol deck would take over. I think that would make more sense. All right, let me look at Gandalf real quick. All right, so that's Flash. Whenever you cast legendary spells and artifact spells as though they had Flash. So he would be useful in the sense that you could play Sam or whatever on your turn before your turn starts. If a legendary permanent or an artifact entering or leaving the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Entering or leaving. I don't think that would be the best. Like, I think the flash effect is okay. And also, after the Fellowship broke apart, that's when Gandalf the White came into play later. So it would still kind of make sense. The main thing would be like Samwise Gamgee. When you play him, he gets to bring back a legendary creature. So that would trigger twice, which would be good. And then Gollum leaving the battlefield, making it tempt you, would trigger twice, which would be okay. But I mean, if you did that deck, you have Frodo, and then Stinger, and then Frodo's Chainmail, Samwise, and maybe just like a Boro Blade, Gandalf, and Glamdring. You could have the Strider, not Strider, the Aragorn card, the white green one with his sword, and then you would have Legolas Greenleaf and the green, just standard dwarf that tempts you when it dies. I don't think it would be terrible. But Gandalf's ability would be kind of wasted. But he still is a 4/5 for 5. That's giving all your stuff flash. Let me look at this real quick. So, Frodo partner. Let's look at Frodo and Sam again real quick. The big thing is like you could flash Frodo in. It's basically like giving your creatures haste almost. Hmm. Let's just type in Frodo. It's also cool because after you build one deck, it's like your stepping stone to the next deck. Yeah, so you could like flash Frodo Sauron's Bane in for 1 mana, and then the next turn you could pay 5 mana and then one shot somebody. So I mean that would be the best benefit of Gandalf, I think there. Then also in here you could have the Eagles, the King of the Eagles, because every time you gain 3 life, you produce another Eagle, so you could have those guys in here as well. But yeah, because 1 drop Frodo Sauerbane, 1/2. And then you pay 2 if Frodo Sauron's Bane is a citizen and becomes a halfling scout with base power and toughness 2, 3, and lifelink. And then if Frodo is a scout, it becomes a halfling rogue with whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game if the ring has tempted you 4 or more times this game. Otherwise, the ring tempts you. So basically, you would have Gandalf in play, and then you'd play Frodo Sauron's Bane, because Gandalf costs 5 mana, and Frodo costs 1. So I'm assuming you'd have like 6 mana or at least 5 mana. So you play Gandalf, and then at the end of the turn, right before your turn, you would flash in Frodo Sauron's Bane. Then on your turn, you would pay the 5 mana to turn him into an assassin and smack somebody, and just kill them outright. And you probably need a tempt, like you need a tempt effect. But if you have the Frodo commander and Sam, you would instantly get to trigger the 3 life gain and then trigger tempt anyway. I think so. Yeah, he'd probably be in the deck. It's really interesting because it's just like since you don't really get to play around with all the options, and also because if we're sticking purely into the realm of Lord of the Rings cards and Lord of the Rings art, which I think a lot of Lord of the Rings fans probably would do because it's blasphemy to just mix these in with every other deck that you have. Um, I find it really interesting because there's so much flavor to it. And since you're stuck into one card set, there's like if you and your play group, for instance, like this is part of the reason I kind of like the universes cards. Even though people will mix the universes cards from like other commander stuff, I think that they should keep the universe cards separated from regular commander in general. So like if you want to use a universe deck, like you can use the universe deck, but not the universe deck like mixed with a bunch of random cards from around the game. I like that idea because it's very interesting. Like you get to keep the power levels of your deck somewhat low, but also somewhat like it's enjoyable. And then if you're finding people with similar decks, like say if we're having a Lord of the Rings only magic like fight and you show up with like Frodo or Aragorn or anything else, like there's probably going to be something that's pretty powerful, but if there's like multiple people playing the game, like there's a good chance that those decks are going to be fairly balanced because like unless everyone's just picking all the most powerful removals and spamming them the whole time, I mean, if they're doing movie thematics, there's so much. No one's deck would be super crazy powerful enough to like just flat out win the game, probably. But I gotta go outside, so I gotta hop off here for a little bit. And I guess I don't know when the Necron deck and stuff's gonna come in, but we have the Nazgul coming, and then we have the Elf deck. So the Elf deck is probably gonna be the next one that I work on. I don't think I'm gonna make that many changes to it though. Probably get rid of Gandalf Westford Traveler and Radagast and stuff out of there, and separate and like give those to other creatures or whatever. But other than that, I'll probably keep the elves fairly similar. I don't have an interest in the Hobbit deck, but then when the Necron deck comes in, we're gonna do that, and then the Tyranid deck from 40K, we're gonna do that. Sadly, I don't have booster packs to like adjust any of those decks, so I might just keep them the same. But I need to look. We also got the collector's edition, so there's Surge foils. So I probably won't make any changes to those decks, even if I could buy singles for them, because if a full Surge foil deck is just kind of cool. And I think in the future I'll just leave them there, and then if someone like wants to buy them off of me, it's a complete set. So, and then after all that, we got to get Marchesa done, and then after that, we got to get Teferi done, or we got to get Teferi done or Marchesa. Teferi was my original first deck that I ever built in Magic, and I took it apart, and it's the one that had the most jank cards in there, but somehow I kept winning all the time. And then Marchesa is just Marchesa, and it's going to be a pretty interesting deck. So hopefully it's going to be my new primary deck after Darien, because I've shelved Darien at this point, and uh, the other card that I was using, I forgot its name, but it was like a cheaper deck that was similar to Darien. Both of those I haven't used in a long time, so Marchesa would probably be my new Kingdom deck. Darien is going to be in there, and then um, Teferi will probably be my like competitive deck, like my top competitive deck pick if I was going to go into a match tournament, because it's just so good. Or at least, against the people I used to play with, it was really good because it's Nami Faith Healer. And the big thing on there is like in the past, I just had Nami Faith Healer and people didn't understand how she was working, so they kept killing it. But I want to make it a Voltron deck. So you do Nami Faith Healer for like 3 mana. It search out Teferi Timebender. Then you have Nami and you have Teferi. So Teferi like soaks up so much damage from you that is pretty ridiculous. But then if we get equipment searches and stuff on there on Nami, then she's gonna get really big and strong. Search out Teferi. Teferi lets you like draw 2 cards or untap a card or take an extra turn. So if he's gonna come in, she's gonna be attacking, then we untap her, boom, and then we're gonna have all the support cards that are gonna let us tap and stuff people's things, and then he's gonna let us tap and untap those repeatedly, and it's gonna be really good. And then if they destroy Nami, I can still tap their stuff or whatever. But it's like if your commander was like draw an extra card, or like when you play it, draw a card or resurrect a card, and then like its abilities were draw 2 cards, untap or vigilance, or it said like take an extra turn after this one. Like all those effects would be really crazy on a commander. And also it's 2 separate health pools. So like if Nami Faith Healer isn't dead or they don't got flyers, Teferi's fine. You know? So he also has built-in protection because Nami is the protection and she's bigger than a token, so really good. I have to go. See y'all guys.